Welcome to the award-winning show, Holding Down the Fort, brought to you by US Vet Wealth,
a podcast show that focuses on sustaining a fulfilling, purposeful military life through conversation and community building.
I'm Jen Amos, a Gold Star daughter, veteran spouse, and creator of Holding Down the Fort.
And I'm Jenny Lynn Stroop, a seasoned military spouse, mom of 2 boys, and your co-host.
Together, we'll converse with special guests from the military community and for the community to share knowledge, resources, and relevant stories on how we can best hold down the fort for ourselves and our loved ones.
Now let's get started.
All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the award-winning podcast show, Holding Down the Fort. I am your co-host, Jen Amos. And of course, as always, I have my amazing co-host with me, Jenny Lynn Stroop. Jenny Lynn, welcome back.
Hey, glad to be here.
Yes. And we are excited because once again, you have brought on someone you know in your network onto our show, which I'm never complaining because you actually make my job easier by not having to do any of the prospecting. And if anyone has been following our show or this season in chronological order, you'll know that my objective for this season is to bring back past guests. So we recently did one with Jen Pasquale from Pride and Grit. And so now, though, your role in this season really, not that you had to have a role other than to show up, but you have taken it upon yourself to bring on a guest of your own. And so, Jenny Lynn, go ahead and let us know, who are we talking to today?
We are talking to my colleague, Rosie McCaddon. She's also a Gold Star spouse and just an all-around awesome champion for mental health and great human being. And I am grateful for her presence here today and the conversation that we're going to have regarding her story as a military spouse.
Yes. Awesome. And without further ado, Rosie, welcome to Holding Down the Fort.
Well, thank you so much for such a warm welcome. I'm just honored to be here and honored to work with Jenny Lynn and to be a part of this podcast today. This is very exciting. Thanks.
Well, thank you. And I think it's mutual all around regards to all the good work, that we all are doing. And it's just nice to talk about it and nice to know that we are not doing it alone and that there's this whole collective effort to, serve our military community. So, Rosie, I think one thing that we definitely have to bring up first and foremost is that we have something in common. We both are Gold Star family members. And although I talk with an upbeat voice because that's my tendency and coping mechanism to be upbeat and everything, I think people know that by now. Being a Gold Star family member, they often say it's not a title that a lot of people are proud to wear. It's not something you look forward to wearing if you end up having that title. And my family has been a Gold Star family for 20 plus years now. And your family has been a Gold Star family for a decade now. And so let's go ahead and open up with that discussion. And for people who don't know about Gold Star family members, what does that mean for you to hold that title?
Well, it's interesting. It's one of those titles where there's actually some debate out there about who gets to hold that title and what it means. And I have my own personal take on it. I think the DoD defines it specifically as people who have lost a family member in combat during wartime. And then a lot of organizations that support surviving families, because there are so many of us, thousands of us, even post 9/11, they are broadening that term informally to include anyone who has lost a family member due to any cause of death in any setting since both pre and post 9/11. I guess a lot of the organizations I've been a part of have been post 9/11, but I think they've recognized a little more quickly than maybe even the DoD has recognized that it really doesn't matter how a service member dies. It's about how they lived. Although I did lose my husband to suicide 10 years ago, he had served for 19 years and 9 months. And I'm very proud of his service and I'm proud for serving alongside of him. And I'm very proud of my children and what they had to give up and how well they did that and the resiliency they created within themselves to do that. So I do consider us a Gold Star family because we have lost someone in the service, both while he was serving and, in my opinion, because of his service in the military.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Rosie. Thank you for being so candid about it. And I think it'll explain a lot about our topic today, which is about suicide prevention, considering that it is Suicide Prevention Month. I want to add something, what you shared. I think it's interesting how your spouse had decided to, unfortunately, take their life about 19 years into service, because my dad was 18 years into service when he had gone missing. And we had every plan to transition out. You know, he was in the Yokosuka Naval Base. It was supposed to be his last place to serve. And then 20 years, we were going to get out. And, you know, things happened the way that it did. Although it's interesting because today my sister is on this journey to uncover Dad's story. We are trying to find his paperwork when they did an investigation on him when he went missing. And in addition to that, she has been talking to, you know, past relatives or people that knew him, even shipmates. And we're starting to gather that maybe on paper, they said that his death is unknown because he may have taken his life. There's history in his service where I found out a year that I was born, he attempted and he didn't succeed. And the only reason why we know this is because they put him through heavy counseling to kind of get back on his feet and continue serving. But I'm wondering if like maybe they said unknown on paper so that we could have our benefits after we get out of the military. I mean, fast forward to today, my siblings and I, you know, all graduated with bachelors. We're doing all right. Mom's a happy empty nester, healthiest she's ever been. But I bring this up because of just that topic on suicide, you know, and I think about for myself, for the longest time, it took me until a couple years ago to realize that I was officially diagnosed with mild depression. And when I look at the symptoms, I realize I've had it since I lost my dad. You know, and I started to realize as I learned more about his story, if it's true, if he did have suicidal ideation, was that handed down to me? You know, did I carry that as well? And so it's a lot of questions. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation. And I'm glad that you shared that because it gets me to even reflect on my dad. And I think it's all in alignment. I think we were meant to have this conversation today.
Yeah. I think we also have come a long way since you lost your dad.
Yeah.
So I think it's so great that we're talking about this because I think even the military has come a long way in understanding suicide loss. And by the time I lost Mike, there'd been a lot of advocacy done because it used to be that if you had that designation, there was the possibility of not getting your benefits, that a suicide could keep the family from getting the benefits that they needed. And it was command dependent. It was sort of like dependent on the investigation. The command got to decide which families got it and which ones didn't, which obviously could just cause a lot of confusion and a lot of hurt across family members who have different commands with different opinions about suicide loss. So I don't know the exact year that it happened, but I know it was before Mike died and not that long. So probably sometime in the 2000s, like maybe 2009, for some reasons, what's coming to mind, there was a change that all suicides were now classified automatically as in the line of duty, which just means that they were working. They were currently active duty. So that's within active duty, that if you are active duty and you're working, then it is considered in the line of duty. The only exception that I'm aware of to that is if they were considered in the process of committing a crime at the time that the suicide occurred. And even then, I think that is still kind of command dependent. But it is progress that we've started to recognize that suicide itself is not a crime. It is a symptom of untreated mental illness. And in my late husband's case, I think also a symptom of an undiagnosed and untreated traumatic brain injury from his time on the bomb squad. So I think we're making these little inroads, even if it's like just starting by taking care of the families. Now I'm hoping that we really can crack the code on how to best help our service members while they're serving. I think we haven't cracked that code yet, and we haven't figured out what it really means to destigmatize mental health in a setting like the military, where we require mental strength and where we do require people to be as healthy as possible when they're carrying deadly weapons. And yet we're also saying, if you seek help, there's a messaging that's still coming within the community of the military that seeking help is a sign of weakness, that it could get you kicked out of the military. And therefore, we're covering up. We're actually actively encouraging people to cover up their mental illness instead of seek the treatment that would help them to be the best service members that they could be. So it's really quite complex. And I don't have the answer other than what I think personally is the answer, is that I've been said from day one that I think if we made mental health counseling as standard as PT, If everybody was required to do it and it wasn't something that you had to specifically seek out, if it was just something that everyone had to do, you didn't have a choice, then I think we would tackle issues as they come up before the embers become a wildfire, so we can actually see if people are getting that kind of weekly mental health care throughout their time in the military, we get to really put out the small fires. We get to hear the thought errors. We get to hear the stressors. We get to give coping skills and teach skills and identify mental illness and treat mental illness before it becomes such a large problem for the families and for the military.
Yeah, no, I think beautifully said. I feel like we can wrap up our conversation there. No, I'm just kidding. Beautifully said. I think if we treat mental health like PT, like you said, and also even just taking a shower, it's like, hey, when you smell, you need a shower. When you have an issue, you need services. I want to take it over to Jenny Lynn, because Jenny Lynn, I know that Matthew actually wrote an article having some experience with suicidal ideation. So I know that you have some thoughts that you want to share and add to this conversation.
Oh, I have all the thoughts on mental health and its destigmatization, and how it very much, like Leslie said, mental health is health, like, period. And I am with Leslie on having been married to a service member now for over a decade, being able to see the different inroads that are being made on making mental health less scary as an option when you're struggling, less, looked at as weak. And I am really grateful for that. The article you spoke about that Matthew wrote, he released that last September during Suicide Prevention Month, but it talked about a time really almost a decade ago. And it took that long for him to come to terms with that's what was going on. As the his spouse, watching that, it was something very up close and in full color to me all along. And I think one of the things that I am grateful for in being able to work with Leslie and befriend Leslie is that she said something to me when we were talking through an article she actually just wrote on her experience with how to help prevent suicide. And one of the things she said was, you have to take care of yourself. And so in her article, and as we have discussed offline and as friends multiple times, what does that look like? And how do we, especially in the military community where there is still a little bit of that hush hush mentality to it, like, don't talk about it, it's not really happening. What does it look like as the person watching someone go through that? And also, how does that affect you? And what do you have to do for yourself in order to be healthy enough to help someone else get help?
I think that's, as we've discussed, that is definitely something that I learned the hard way. And I think you did too. It wasn't until I felt myself kind of going down with his sinking ship, I realized so much that I was kind of joining him in the problematic thinking and the problematic thought errors, really, that he was thinking. Like, I was buying into it on some level and trying to understand what he was thinking and feeling. And I think what we've talked about is that what I now understand is I never want to understand what he was actually thinking. Because if I truly understood it, that would mean that my brain would be as unwell as his was when he took his life. So the most important thing that I could ever do for him and for me and for our children whom he loved dearly was to stay as healthy as I possibly could myself. And so I did seek out mental health care. I think the best that I personally received was outside of the military. I felt the safest personally to talk to someone who was covered by our insurance, but who wasn't working in the same hospital where my husband had now become. He'd been on the bomb squad, enlisted, then became an officer and became an OBGYN, actually. So he was a physician in this hospital where I had tried seeing a psychiatrist and a therapist there, but I felt like anything I said, I just couldn't buy into the confidentiality. It just didn't feel safe enough to me. So I did have to focus on my own mental health. And ultimately, the really difficult thing about that in my case, and unfortunately is true in a lot of cases that I know about, is ultimately, because while my husband was getting sicker, really, with his mental health, and I was getting healthier, it became clear to me that until he got help, I had to protect our children from where he was going mentally. Like he had become really dangerous to himself and by extension to the people around him. And that was a really difficult thing for me to face because he was my best friend. We'd been friends since I was 19. We got married when I was 25 and we had 3 beautiful children together and built our whole life together. And I wanted more than anything to save him. But ultimately, what you realize as you get healthy is that you can support someone, but ultimately they have to want to get that help themselves. They have to be willing to get that help themselves. And I burned down every door really to try to get him help before I left, and was ultimately faced with the reality that I needed to get some space to protect our children and protect myself, and in order to be able to try to continue to help him. So I think that's another really difficult thing that isn't being talked about. And that certainly wasn't being talked about in the military when I was in. In fact, it was seen as a failure on my part to walk away from someone who needed me versus the empowering truth, which is that I put every support I could in place for him. He pushed it all away because of his own fears, because of the fear of stigma, the fear of losing his career, all of these very real fears he wasn't wrong to have at the time. But the most healthy thing I could do, the gift I could give him, was to protect our children, was to get them to a safe place and hope that that was enough for him to finally get the help that he needed. In our case, it breaks my heart that that's not what happened, that we lost him 5 months later. It's completely tragic to me, but I also am not sure. It's difficult. Like I always think there's hope, but the hope has to come ultimately from the person who's struggling themselves. And as someone who has struggled with depression myself and anxiety myself, and both related to grief and just chemistry, genetics, like we talked about before, has this been passed down? In my case, absolutely. For my children, absolutely. Both sides of the family. It's a reality of our brain chemistry, but the messaging that my children are getting, as opposed to what my husband was getting in the military, is that you seek help. Like exactly. If you smell, you take a shower. If you're feeling anxious, you get support. If you're depressed, there's a reason for that. And we treat that both with medicine and with therapy as needed and as defined by the experts as what is needed. Mm-hmm. This is nothing to be ashamed of. Nothing has gone wrong. You're not broken. You just have an illness like any other health issue that requires treatment, and treatment works. So I wish that I could kind of be the mom to every service member and every family out there and just say it's out there and it works. And you're worthy of that help, even if it means you lose your career. Even if it means you lose that, because your life has value, intrinsic value, and you're needed, So I want to say that to all the service members. And then I also want to I have this open letter I'm always writing that starts, and maybe it'll be a book someday, with "Dear Generals, we have a problem." Mm-hmm. And it's that I want to get to the top. I want to sit down with everyone and be like, okay, enough. What do we actually have to do as a family here? We need a mother to come in and say, nothing's wrong with you. You just need some medicine, whether that's therapy or, an actual pharmaceutical option.
Leslie, wow. Just absolutely powerful. I love that you're speaking that. I want to be the mom. I want to be the person that can be like, hey, this is what it looks like on the other side if you don't get help. And often part of why I like to show up as a Gold Star daughter is I like to hopefully, have, let's say, fathers that are active duty military to look at me and think of their own daughter and think I have to do this for my daughter. I'm very grateful that I've gotten so much help to be at a place where to know about my dad's story, to not interpret it as, oh, he didn't love me. Oh, he didn't want to be there for me. I was only one when he decided. It's I could have easily told myself a very sad story about that. And I'm so grateful for all the help that I've gotten. And part of why I show up is I hope that even my own existence will encourage our active duty service members and families to get help, because it's so needed. It's so necessary. And it's so wonderfully accessible today, right? Yes. Yeah. And Jenny Lynn, I thought I'd check in with you because, you and I are so big on talking about mental health. And sometimes we joke about it and we laugh about it quite often, but we mean it. We absolutely mean it. And so I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think both of you really speak to the reality of needing to take care of yourself. Thinking back, you reminded me of Matthew's article and thinking back to that time in our life and then all the things that came after. I really, much like Leslie, put up a very large protective bubble around myself in regard to my own mental health and well-being. I saw a therapist and, am also part of a 12-step recovery program that provides an extraordinary amount of support and a way of life that empowers me to do what I need to do for myself. And that promises in doing that, it will change the air in your house. I don't know really how else to say it, but people will begin to see the change in you and that one way or the other will affect them. And 99% of the time, it's for the better. And so my own journey with watching him struggle and struggling myself, I definitely went down the loop too for quite a while and was pretty unhealthy myself. But in realizing that neither of us were going to come out better if we both went down the drain, and putting up that bubble around myself, what happened in our case is that me getting healthy did change the air in our house. And because of that, we have a much different relationship now than we for sure did then. And also had kind of in the years after the most intense struggle, because those years caused a lot of hurt on both sides. But in continuing to make sure that I was at my healthiest, it allowed for those hurts to come to the surface and to be talked about and to be worked through. And so we have a very different marriage today than, and I would say much deeper than even, we did when we thought we were so in love 12 years ago when we got married. And so I personally cannot say enough about the need for good quality help and mental health care for myself and my family, but really for active duty families. Sometimes this, and earlier today we recorded with Jen Pasquale, and we talked about that cumulative effect of military life. I mean, it speaks to what Leslie said, Mike saw and did a lot of things. It's never one thing.
It's never one thing.
It's never one thing. And so the need for accessible help and healthcare while on active duty, I just think, I'm with you. And it's funny, I heard Leslie say dear generals, and I'm like, Admiral?
Yes.
And I have long been a proponent of it really is going to take not just those of us, like the three of us on this podcast, who have personal family experience and also individual help, but people in the military who are willing to say, look, I got help and I still made rank. Look, yes. I got help and I still move forward. Look, I got help and my family didn't implode. Look, I got help.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think both your story and my story say that. Your story shows, look, we got help and it worked. My story shows he refused to get help and he died from his illness, because he didn't get that help. So I think having those stories out there in our communities is what's so important. And I think makes you so brave, Jenny Lynn, honestly, because it is so difficult. You mentioned that being active duty, being in that community, and where it is still hushed and where it's still said, we don't talk about this. And I was too scared. I mean, I went to his command, but I didn't go to my friends. Mm-hmm. I didn't tell people, I didn't tell my peers, hey, we're struggling and I don't know what to do, because I was afraid of embarrassing him. I was afraid of embarrassing myself. I didn't know, other than my therapist and maybe a couple of close friends outside the military, where I could really open up. And so I just want to thank you for your courage, truly, because it's that kind of courage from within the military that's really going to continue the conversation that ultimately makes the kind of changes we need to make. Like, this has got to happen. And I'm kind of on the outside shouting in, like I still, have these opportunities, and I still, I've done a lot of advocacy. Time Magazine did a cover story about Mike's death, and that's been out in the world. And I spoke at the DoD VA. There was a suicide prevention conference in 2012 I spoke at in front of generals. I got to really tell my story and try to be heard. And yet I sort of feel like I'm on the outside, like I'm in that. And I don't know if you experienced this too, Jen, like being a Gold Star family it's so disorienting is the word that comes to mind. Yeah. Because I still feel like the military is my family, but I don't feel like the military always sees me as part of their family. And I try to respect that, because I also know what I represent is the scariest thing that can happen to anybody in the military. And it's too scary to look over there. It's easier to not fully acknowledge that your spouse may die. Like, who wants to think about that when you're trying to just survive being a military spouse? I know I didn't. I wasn't going out of my way. I didn't really know people personally at that time. And anyway, but I think like what you're doing is what needs to happen, is that conversation from within, and being willing to be honest, both you and your husband, being willing to say, hey, I've struggled and I'm got help and I'm still successful. He's still successful in his career. He's showing that it is completely possible to have treatment and excel in the military.
Yeah. This is why I absolutely appreciate Jenny Lynn for being on the show. And I don't take her transparency and her openness for granted, because I just think about even my mom when she was a military spouse and how she just kept moving forward. It wasn't about having this open discussion of, hey, we're going to move again. It's more like, hey, put that in this box. And, it was more about just moving forward and forward and forward. And then even after we lost Dad, it was almost as if he was forgotten. I mean, after we did everything we needed to transition back into the civilian world, it was almost as if he didn't exist. Like, yeah, we would visit his marker in Fort Rosecrans Cemetery every Sunday, but like that was it. Even when we would show up to his marker, my mom would stand there silently and, probably praying in her head, but there was never this outside dialogue of what had happened, And so it was very much this whole, like, you got to internalize it. And Leslie, I appreciate you bringing up just kind of the experience of what it's like to be a Gold Star family member, because when I started this podcast show, I very much had an imposter syndrome about it, because I thought, okay, I want to talk to military families, but like I'm a Gold Star family and I don't know if I'm going to remind people of their mortality. I don't know if they want to talk to me. I don't know if they want to block me out of their memory. I don't know. I don't know if spouses will understand, but it's like our own existence matters, right? Like our own existence, our own story. And I just want to commend you, Leslie, for just being so articulate in sharing the journey of your family and what your experience has been as a Gold Star wife. And you're right. It's like, because we're far removed from this military life, we can kind of look from the outside in and say, hey, do this, do that. Or like, you're going to be okay. Get help, because we know what it's like on the other side. And not that we're trying to like scare people, but the reality is there. I mean, you joined the military knowing full well that someone might lose their life, and so our existence should be a good reminder, but not in a way where it scares people off to like not do their wills, for example. It's like, oh no, I don't want to do my will because I don't want to think about death, but just being reminded of like, what could we do to prevent something such as this, such as suicide, if it's possible.
Yeah. I agree. And I think it's really about supporting one another. It's just about learning that we're all in this together. Like whether, you're serving right now, whether you're an officer or you're enlisted, whether you're a spouse or a service member, whether you're a child, like the Army is only, like it's the whole thing. Like you're only as good as your weakest link. Mm-hmm. Well, that applies to the whole network of the military. It's not just the soldiers. The soldiers are impacted by their families and the families are impacted by their soldiers. And we have to constantly be looking at how to strengthen the military as a whole. And that really has to include the family members. And in a way, it's like the absolute best place to start, in my opinion, because, it's like when the family's strong, then we're able to take care of ourselves so that then we can help service members who are maybe dealing with more complex concerns around help seeking, but we can empower them and through conversation with each other. As Jenny Lynn speaks to other wives and says, hey, this didn't ruin his career to get his help. That strengthens another spouse to tell their spouse, this isn't going to ruin your career, but we need to do this because it's what's best for you. It's what's best for our family. And it's ultimately what's best for the military too. Because if your husband hadn't received help, if Matthew hadn't done what he did, they'd be missing out on a really great asset for the military. So it's important on all levels for everyone to understand that and for that conversation to, I mean, it sometimes feels like we're shouting into a great abyss. Like, I feel like, it's like the who's in Whoville, but I do feel like eventually, like if we just keep telling the stories, there'll be that final little yop from the tiny little who, and it'll like be what changes everything. Right. So each one of our voices, all of our stories are so important, and podcasts like this that are just opening up the conversation are so important, because so hopefully somebody's listening alone in their car and they're hearing like, wait a minute, this is the day that I say no more. I'm going to get help for myself, or I'm going to help my spouse.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about some action items now. And I know we were talking a little bit offline on, addressing these issues, bringing them to light, prioritizing the family, taking care of the family, which I absolutely love. And I just have to applaud you for getting to that place where you knew you needed to, distance yourself from your husband. Like, just talking about your background, how you two have been together for so long to get to that place. I just have to commend you for the strength that it must have taken to get to that point. Because some people would have gone down in the ship with him, in a sense, and I can only imagine what that process was like for you. And I'm glad you're here on the other side to talk about it. So I just think it's worth noting how, I guess in a way, candid you can share that today. So I just want to thank you for that. And so as we wrap up, let's talk about what do we need to do for military families, military service members to feel safe, to know that it's okay to get this kind of support. Let's open up with that. And Leslie, I'll start with you.
I think it's everything we've been saying. I think the conversations need to be had. The more people who can share how it has helped them, the better. I do think it takes kind of the fearless spouses who are willing to talk to leadership in the military. I think Jenny Lynn and I are both people who have done that and who speak our minds and say, hey, I'm just going to go ahead and speak some truth into this situation. And this is the reality. And this is what we need to do. And I'm not saying everyone's cut out to do that, but I will say that at the end of the day, with how my story ended, what gave me this strength, what has given me this strength to continue and to be an advocate, is that I really did try everything. Like I did go to counselors on my own. I went to our primary care. I sat down with his commander. Every single one of them missed an opportunity to help our family, but that does not have to be the case for everyone. And the fact that I had those conversations, that I was courageous enough to do that, even though I was scared to death, the fact that those conversations took place are what has allowed the military to look at his specific suicide and take some ownership. Unlike a lot of people out there who very quickly want to be like, oh, they had marital problems, that's why it happened. Or, oh, they had a drug addiction. Let's not talk about why the addiction started. Let's just say, oh, that it was because of that thing, not the military. We didn't have any missed opportunities here. Keep on going. In Mike's case, because I had reached out and I had documented every single time I reached out, I followed up every single one with an email. I had this stack of like, look at everything I tried. I tried to save all of us this heartache, and was met with resistance from the inside because of that. Even though my story did not end the way that I wanted it to, even though I wish every day that Mike was here, I now have the ear, of certain people. That is why Time Magazine was willing to do that article, is because there was documentation and follow-up and responses.
Yeah, that's incredible.
So that we could do the investigation, so that people could say, ooh, maybe we shouldn't assume that every spouse who is saying we really need help is just trying to create drama. And, I was told that, residency is really hard. We know this is hard on you, as if I was kind of bored and looking for looking for attention. And it was not the case at all. But because I think that's what we can do. I think you can fearlessly speak up and be willing to fight for your family and their lives. And is that always going to have a positive outcome? No, but I will tell you, even with a negative outcome, that is what gives me strength to keep going on, is that I did try everything I knew how to try. So even though we don't have him alive today, I never have to ask myself, what else could I have done? So I think that that's what I would like to encourage. Now, that's easy for me to say on the outside. That's easy for me over here where I'm not looking at blowing up a career, but I'm hoping, Jenny Lynn, it seems like we're making that progress. I don't know specifically whose career is being blown up. I hear isolated cases, but I want to believe that we're making progress and that the truth is people can seek help, if not through the military, then outside the military with the kind of work that Jenny Lynn and I are both doing. Like there are nonprofits, there are other mental health options that are supporting outside the system.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I do want to address the career thing in saying that some of the fears are completely founded. There are other things that impacted my husband's career and our ability to go and do things. It was not mental health related and it had nothing to do with him seeking treatment for that. I do want to say that there are other things. And I want to say it's been my experience in that same sort of advocacy lane that most of it comes down to personalities over principles. And the principles are changing in the favor of help and knowing the whole family unit needs support. Do I still think it has a long way to go? Sure, I do. That's why there are many nonprofits that support the military sector because, one, they can't do it all. It would be impossible to do it all. And so there are wonderful nonprofits out there in support of service members and their families. But my hope is that just like in my family's case, it was truly a personality over a principle, but that the principles are in the right place. In my work as the outreach coordinator for the Stephen A. Cohen Military Family Clinic at VVSD, I have a front row seat to looking at the things, especially the Department of the Navy, because that's whom I work with most often and very closely with. Like those principles are changing and they are putting people and programs in place to address all of this. So the support is there. And I am hopeful that as more and more people realize this is not a career buster, the support will continue to grow and people will continue to access it, because I do think the principles are shifting for the good.
That's amazing to hear. And that's what I hope for, because sometimes we just look at the numbers and the numbers say something different than, when you have something as large as the entire military, changing a principle is going to be, it's a huge seismic shift and it takes time for that to actually, kind of build up into something on the surface that we actually see in practice. But I do find a lot of comfort in hearing from someone within it. And as I'm starting to see too, in the work, I've just started working with Jenny Lynn doing outreach for some of the clinics we're opening in other parts of California too. And I have the same feeling of hope for the first time in a long time that I can see the beginnings of this shift. And I love that idea that it's a principle shift. And now we do just have to, maybe a few personalities need to catch up. And the way that happens too is really by having these conversations and to keep having them.
Oh, wonderful. I don't have anything else to say after that other than thank you both for, this conversation and for just continuing to create awareness. And this is a great way to bring awareness to Suicide Prevention Month and to have a fellow Gold Star family member to share their perspective. So thank you, Leslie. And we will provide some resources in the show notes here if you're interested in some of the resources. But Leslie, before we wrap up, how would you like people to get a hold of you, or what is a resource you want to share with us today before we go?
Well, I have to share, like Jenny Lynn said, that the Cohen Veteran Network has clinics throughout the United States that are serving military families, veterans, and their families. There is help available. And I definitely would encourage everyone to see if there is a Cohen clinic in their area. And you can find me right now on Facebook, I guess is the best place. I'm on there as Leslie Amanda, but I also have done some coaching of moms and military widows. And you can find me there at The Happiest Mom Coach. And I still do that a little bit on the side, although my priority is with the clinics now.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both. Leslie, thank you so much for joining us. Jenny Lynn, thank you again for bringing on an incredible guest. To our listeners, we hope that you got a lot of value from today. And of course, if you need those resources and a way to contact Leslie, we'll have that in the show notes for you. So all that being said, thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll chat with you in the next episode. Tune in next time. We hope that you enjoyed today's conversation.
Get access to our show notes and subscribe to our newsletter by checking out the details of this episode on your preferred podcasting platform or visit our website, holdingdownthefortpodcast.com.
And while you're on holdingdownthefortpodcast.com, be sure to follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or our YouTube channel.
If you got a lot of value from today's conversation, kindly leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or leave us a recommendation on our LinkedIn profiles.
Thanks for listening. Tune in next time.